Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here, and for those of you who've attended several sessions, we appreciate your interest and your patience. If you are a student considering applying to boarding school, would you raise your hand? Just want to see how many students are in the space. Great. Hello. So today we're going to talk about admission interview tips. How many of you students have participated in an interview? Anybody? So it's a bit of a new thing for a young student to participate in an interview, and you might feel a little nervous, and we understand that. So I'm just going to give you a couple of tips to keep in mind. I'll also keep in mind or share some tips for parents, because sometimes the parents are more nervous than the students. So again, my name is Angela Brown, and I am the Assistant Head of School for Admission and Strategic Initiatives at Dana Hall School, a girls' boarding school right outside of Boston. This is my 24th year working in American private schools. So I have interviewed thousands of students and read thousands of applications, which is why I can offer some expert advice on interviews. The first tip I'm going to share with you, I'm going to share two tips with you. I'll talk to you a little bit about the difference between a virtual and an in-person interview, some things to keep in mind. I'll share a few more tips, and then I'll answer any additional questions you have. Students, my first tip for you is to be yourself. You may think that a school wants one particular version of a student, but that is not true. They really want a diverse group of students with different interests and different talents and different ways of contributing to the community. So it's really important that you be yourself in the interview. Share what makes you excited, what sort of things you like to do inside and outside of school. I want you to know that an interview is a conversation. It's not a test. A test typically means you don't know the answers. You can't predict what the questions will be. But in an interview, you're talking about yourself, and you are the expert on yourself. So it's not a test, and we're not trying to trick you. We simply want to get to know you. So if you love soccer or ice hockey or painting or anime, it doesn't matter. We would love to talk to you about it. And we talk to young people for a living. We're very friendly, and we want you to feel comfortable. So we're going to ask you questions about your school, about favorite book you've read, your afternoon activities outside of the school day, what you like to do with your family for fun. Very simple questions to answer because they're all things that you already know about yourself. The second tip is to ask good questions. I'm curious if any student in the audience has an idea of what makes a good question. You think about what makes a good question. Yes.
Maybe like something that reflects to like the student life that's at school, like the experience.
Okay, excellent. You've said something that reflects the student life or student experience. That's a great answer. Here is a tip. If you can find the answer to your question easily on the website, you probably should think of another question. So I'm going to give you an example of a question that's a bit simple. Do you have a swim team? Do you think that's a question you could find the answer to on a website? So that doesn't really spark a conversation. If you are really interested in swimming and you check the website and see they have a swim team, what might you ask your interviewer to learn a little bit more about the school and the people and the swim team? Do you have an idea what you might ask? Yes.
Which kind of people is in junior varsity?
So you asked a question about junior varsity, maybe a question more about the tryouts or the type of skill level. That's a great idea. Another idea you could ask, how does the swim team show its team spirit? That's a question that could spark a conversation that would show you a little bit more about the school culture, how students encourage each other, what kind of school spirit they have. Maybe you'd get a fun story about their rival team and the kinds of things they do that lead up to the swim meet. That will enhance your conversation and enhance what you learn about the school. But if you ask a simple yes or no question, it doesn't encourage more conversation. Okay, can you think of another good question you could ask that the answer isn't easily found on the website? Anyone have an idea?
I think mine's like a silly question, but I always ask like, how's the food there? Like their personal opinion.
Personal opinion about the food, right? Now, I bet you no one is ever going to tell you the food is terrible, right? They're just not going to tell you that. But I've had a student ask me once, what's the worst meal in the dining hall? You got to be honest, right? Because there probably is one meal that maybe the students aren't super excited about. But it gets a conversation going, and they're certainly not going to put that on the website, right? So again, it's how do you ask things you're curious about that reflect what you care about, but also aren't just simple yes or no questions. You can always use the website to help spark your curiosity. So check out different pages on the website, and then you might find something, I want to know more about that. I want to learn a little bit more about that. So use the website to spark your curiosity, but ask a question that isn't easily posted on the website. Many of you will participate in virtual interviews. I want to assure you, if a school offers virtual interviews, that means they are just as happy with the virtual interview as an in-person interview. We recognize it takes a lot of time and resources to come to the States, so we don't expect that everyone would be able to do that. We offer virtual interviews in order to get to know you and have a one-on-one conversation. And thanks to a quick increase in technology, we can have these conversations rather easily. But there are a few things you want to keep in mind for a virtual interview. Raise your hand, students, if you have taken a virtual class or tutoring session or something already. Most of us have, right? So we're used to being on camera and talking to someone. So what are the things that you make sure you do if you have a virtual tutoring session or class? What are some of the things that you might do in advance of that virtual class? Yes?
Prepare like a well-lit place so like the interviewer could see you, and then you can prepare like a room for that. So like there's no disruptions, minimal disruptions.
Absolutely. So we've shared having a place where you can easily be seen and heard. If you are in a room that's too dark and I can't see your face, well, that's not helpful. Or have you ever been in a Zoom where the camera was up somebody's nose and you were looking up someone's nose the whole time, right? That's not fun. So you want to make sure the camera is angled so we can easily see your face. Also, if you can, you want to be in a place where there's not other people coming in and out. And you might have to tell your family members in advance, I'm going to be on a Zoom. Can we keep it quiet? So that we can hear each other. Now, of course, there are normal sounds. There's a train that goes by, or I've had a fire alarm go off in a Zoom before, right? There are things you can't predict. A baby might be crying, but those things are normal and we don't mind. but you do want to make sure that you can be seen and heard very clearly. You also want to make sure you have a background that's not too distracting. Sometimes I find that students, especially when you were Zooming all the time, you found it fun to change your background to something wacky and colorful and it moves. You don't want to distract the interviewer, so just choose a simple background if you're going to use a virtual one, or if it's going to be your own home or apartment, make sure you're happy with the way things look before you get on camera. Typically, schools will speak to students and parents separately. Parents, I want you to hear this clearly. If we ask to speak to the students separately, you shouldn't be in the room. You may think that we can't tell because you're not on the camera, but we can tell when you're in the room. Your child acts differently. Their eyes are darting back and forth. They say an answer and then they look this way. We know when you're in the room. And we really want to have an authentic conversation with your son or daughter. So we ask that you be in a separate place and then you'll have your turn. When you have your turn, students keep this in mind. You know, when you Zoom, you can wear something that looks very professional on the top and perhaps pajama bottoms on the bottom, right? That's fine, but just remember, when you stand up to go get your parents in the other room, we might see what's on the bottom. So think about that, just in case you feel like your pajama pants may be embarrassing, okay? I would also suggest with a virtual interview that you practice logging on first, just so you get out the jitters and figure out the technology, so when it's your actual date and time, you're ready to go. In-person interviews. For an in-person interview, you don't have to think of as many things as you do virtually, but you do have to think about what you're going to wear. I would suggest that you wear clothes that make you feel confident and comfortable. If you don't usually wear a suit and tie, and you don't like wearing a suit and tie, and then you wear a suit and tie to an interview, do you know what happens? You're fidgeting and you're itching and you're pulling at your clothes, and that will distract you. And it may distract the interviewer. If you don't like wearing a dress, then don't wear a dress to the interview. You want to wear clothes you're used to, that you like, and that make you feel comfortable and confident. Again, parents, we will usually speak with the student separately than from you. And we do that so that we really can get to know the student. And then we'll chat with you because we want to get to know the student from your perspective. And we'll have the opportunity for you to ask questions. Here again, important for you to have a couple of questions prepared so that you know what you want to ask in advance. Here are some additional tips for before the interview. I would suggest taking down the phone number of the admission office so that if you're running late, you can easily let them know. Even if it's a Zoom interview, you want to let people know that you might be running late. I would also suggest before the interview, we talked about the questions. Sometimes people wonder about when they should schedule the interview. Typically, the season of interviews is October through January. Sometimes parents think, if I schedule the interview for the last possible day, my child will know that much more math, that much more science. he'll be that much smarter, and the interview will go that much better. That's not how it works, because we're not going to ask them any math questions. It's not a test. So schedule an interview that works for you. I would suggest, though, before you schedule, you don't just look at your own parent calendar, but look at your child's school schedule. Oftentimes, you didn't realize there's going to be a field trip or there's a big test, and you don't want to have to call the admission office back and reschedule 5 times because you didn't look at those things in advance. So just take a peek, but I would suggest scheduling an interview as soon as possible, not waiting till the last minute. After the interview, my tips for you is that typically a student might send a thank you email, thanking the interviewer for the conversation. I would suggest you send one email. I would suggest you send one email. If you send 10, guess what the admission counselor starts to think? It's a little overwhelming. One thank you email that shares what you learned, mentions that you're excited about learning more, or you hope that they'll consider your admission is sufficient. But if you send an email once a week saying, this is what I had for breakfast on Tuesday, and this is what I'm going to do this weekend, and I can't wait for this festival, and every time we get that email, you may think, this is going to help Miss Brown remember me. I will remember you, but it may not be the way you want me to. So, one thank you email is sufficient. I also would suggest that you proof your email. Now, I'm not asking you to write an email like you're a 45-year-old lawyer. It should be your own writing, but you can proof it, you can spell check, and what's super important is that you make sure you're mentioning the right school to the right person. Sometimes we get emails that say, it was so wonderful to speak with you. I'm so excited about Emma Willard School. I'm Dana Hall School. You forgot to change the name. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be admitted, but it's just a mistake that was simple to fix by proofing. We understand that you are applying to several schools, and you might be excited about several schools. Just proof your email to make sure the school you name is going to the right school representative. Lastly, if a school is not your first choice, please don't say it's your first choice in the email. We often have families say, I can't wait, we're just so hopeful, we promised we would come, and then we admit the student and they don't come. It just doesn't feel good, and it's not necessary because we know you have choices and you might be applying to 3 or 5 or 8 schools. You don't need to tell us we're your first choice to impress us. You can simply say, I am excited about the possibility of attending your school. Okay. I've shared some very simple tips with you, but I do believe if you put them into practice, you can have a very fun, very informative interview. Students, what was my first tip? Be yourself. Being yourself means talking about who you are, being honest about who you are and what you want to do. What was my second tip? Do you remember it was about question? Yes. Ask good questions. That was tip number 2, that you want to be prepared with 2 or 3 good questions. Now, I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about the interview process.
I want to ask, like, what's the good, like, a sign of a good interview? And, like, if I wrote a thank you letter and, like, the admissions officer didn't, like, get back to me, does that mean something else?
So the question was, what makes a successful interview?
Yes.
And what happens if the interviewer doesn't respond back? So, a good interview is a good conversation. And that means I've learned something about you and feel like you've learned something about my school. That doesn't mean that you had to talk constantly, or that you were really outgoing, or that you're really funny. We understand there are lots of different kinds of students out there. So if you are a shyer person, and you don't like being on stage, or not really comfortable speaking to people you don't know, we're not looking for that. We're just looking for you to be willing to answer the questions we ask and to converse with us. So we're not looking for a certain personality, but I would say as long as we feel like I've learned more about you, you've learned more about my school, that's a good conversation and a good interview. As far as an email, I do want you to remember, you are one student likely applying to 4 to 6 schools. The admission counselor might have interviewed 300, 400 students that year. Can you imagine getting 300 to 400 emails? Our hope is that we would reply to every student, but I think it is possible that it could have slipped through the cracks. It would not be our intention. It would not be with any malice, but it could happen, and I would suggest that you keep in mind how it might be on the reverse of receiving 300 or 400 emails from students, which is why I suggested you only send one, because if you have 300 students who send you 4 emails, right? But keep in mind, it was likely just an oversight, and it wasn't intentional. It just, we can receive a lot of emails. That's a great question.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Other questions parents might have about the interview? Are you feeling like you have a little more clarity and a little more confidence, and you know that it's a conversation and it's not a test. It's just a conversation. It's a piece of the application for us to learn more about you. It's an opportunity to talk one-on-one, which with all our big events, we don't have the opportunity to talk to you one-on-one, so it's a lovely opportunity to get to know the person, but we know it's just 20 or 30 minutes. Your teachers spend so much more time with you, seeing you day in and day out, when you're in a good mood, when you're in a bad mood. They'll be able to help us understand who you are, so that's why we don't want you to get nervous, because it's only 20 or 30 minutes. We can't know everything there is about you in 30 minutes, and that's why there's so many pieces of the application that help us get to know who you are as a student and as a community member. Any other questions? All right, thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate your time. Have a great day.